Okay, we're at 3:05, so I'm going to go ahead and get started and we can get going. So hello everyone. Thank you for tuning in on this lovely afternoon. This weather has been incredible this week. Welcome to our EcoQuestions session with Great Milkweed Grow Out. This is being recorded and we ask that everyone remain muted until it's time for the question and answer session. So during the presentations, feel free to type questions into the chat and we'll address those at that time as well. For those of you who are not familiar with the Metro Phoenix Ecoflora, we are a community science project that is documenting urban biodiversity using a free web-based platform and app called iNaturalist. In addition, we increase plant appreciation and contribute to local conservation efforts. Every month, in addition to the overall project, we have a new EcoQuest challenge that searches for specific plants or ecological interactions. So EcoQuestions are presentations followed by question and answer sessions with scientists, experts, or community members focused on that EcoQuest topic of the month. And today, in coordination with our February EcoQuest, Monarchs, Milkweeds, and Mystery, we have Dr. Kim Pegram, the Program Director of Pollinator Conservation and Research, and Natalie Melkonoff, the Plant and Insect Ecology Program Coordinator from Desert Botanical Garden. Kim and Natalie work together on the Great Milkweed Grow Out initiative, which is helping monarchs through propagation, outreach, and expanding monarch research. Without further ado, I will turn it over to Kim and Natalie.
Great. Okay, I'm going to get the PowerPoint up.
Just a friendly reminder, everyone, please stay muted until we get to the question and answer session. Thank you.
Are we good?
Yeah. So you're gonna have to do the timing, I guess. But so I'm gonna start presenting a little bit of this, and then Natalie will jump in. So like Jenny said, I work at Desert Botanical Garden, and my focus is on monarch and pollinator conservation and research. So we're going to give just a brief overview. Some of this, probably most of you know some of the basic information, but we're going to talk a little bit about monarchs and why they're important and what's going on with them. And then Natalie's going to touch on more about what you can do beyond searching for them through the EcoQuest. So we'll start off, which I think has been highlighted through some of the materials sent out through EcoFlora, the Metro Phoenix EcoFlora, is there are two what we call milkweed butterflies in the Phoenix area. One is the monarch, the one we're talking about, and the other is the queen. They're very closely related. They're in the same genus. And so they can sometimes be hard to tell apart, but other times, but it's relatively easy once you get a feel for it. And I'm sure, if you log them into iNaturalist, any of them are nice to have any observations of these. So in general, the monarchs are larger and a little more like a bright orange, and have more black markings along the veins on their wings. Whereas the queens are a little smaller, a little more like a brownish orange. And you'll see, if you can see there, that the top of their forewing doesn't have the black lines highlighted, the veins highlighted on their wings. You can also tell the caterpillars apart by looking at the number of protuberances that are on the caterpillars. So the monarchs only have two pairs, one on the front and one on the back, whereas the queens have three, one on the front, one on the back, and a pair in the middle. We generally only see monarchs here in the Metro Phoenix area October through May-ish. So that's why this kind of search for them is particularly important, because we don't see them around. Whereas queens, we do. They tend to, we see them active all year long in the Phoenix area. So we call them milkweed butterflies because milkweed plants, generally those in the genus Asclepias, are the only plants that monarch and queen butterflies lay their eggs on and their caterpillars can eat. They have this very close relationship. And so females are seeking out those milkweed plants to lay eggs on, and caterpillars won't survive without the milkweed. So that's why, you know, even if we're tracking down monarchs, it's also important to know where the milkweeds are, because without milkweeds, the monarchs can't be successful here. So just a quick overview of the monarch life cycle. So a female will lay an egg on a milkweed plant. It's just a tiny little thing. One of the reasons we didn't, I mean, if you want to record eggs in iNaturalist, if you happen to find any, that would be great, but it's very hard or impossible really to tell the difference between a queen egg and a monarch egg. They look exactly the same and are about the same size, so it would be hard to identify it past probably genus. So female lays the egg on a milkweed, and this tiny little caterpillar about the size of an eyelash hatches out of the egg and then eats a lot of milkweed till it gets to the point where it is several inches long and about 2,000 times its original size in about 2 weeks. And then it will, when it's ready, it'll form a chrysalis, or the pupa stage. Also, you can sometimes there's very small markings where you can tell the difference between a queen and a monarch chrysalis, but it's difficult. So, you know, we're focusing on the stages that are easier to identify. And then out of the chrysalis will come the monarch butterfly, and they'll live either a few weeks or several months, depending on the migratory stage that they're in, and they will seek out a mate and continue the process. Now, I'll point out for those of, you know, if you're looking for caterpillars, looking for them to form a chrysalis, during cooler weather, like in the winter, not necessarily right now, but in the winter, this process does take longer. Cooler weather, they tend to, you know, move a lot slower, so they're not growing as fast and progressing through the stages as fast. So one of the best known things about monarchs in the general public is that they go through this incredible migration. And when we look at the migration, there's really two populations. One is the eastern population, where they spend the summer and spring in the east and Midwest, generally east of the Rocky Mountains, and then spend the winter in Mexico. And then the western population primarily spends the winter on the coast of California, and can be found in California and other parts of the West through the summer. Now, you know, we're searching for monarchs, and we see monarchs in the Metro Phoenix area this time of year. And what we're actually seeing is probably part of the Western population, that we see this very small, just a few individuals that are probably overwintering here. But there's a lot of questions about whether they are completely overwintering here or whether they are mating, laying eggs, reproducing, and what the timing of that is. But we do see, like you can see in this map, we do see in Arizona that in the spring and fall months, mainly the fall, we get this interchange from the two populations, where we've got individuals going to both Mexico and the coast of California. And we know that through some of the local tagging programs, or through Southwest Monarch Study. So the other kind of well-known fact, unfortunately, about monarchs is that they are of conservation concern at this point, because there has been a pretty drastic decline. We've known for a long time the it's been well publicized for a long time that the eastern population has the overwintering in Mexico has fallen quite a bit, and there's been a lot of conservation efforts focused on that. What you're seeing is the total, the graph you're seeing is the total area that the butterflies cover on these forests in Mexico, because there's so many we can't actually individually count them, and instead it's done by looking like at an aerial photograph and looking at the area that these butterflies cover. And so that has been, and there's a correlation between that and the amount of butterflies. So that's been on the decline for a while. Less publicized until recently has been the Western monarchs. They have, dropped from millions in the 1980s to this year, less than 2,000 were recorded, 2,000 individuals in the entire coast of California. And the previous 2 years were less than 30,000 individuals. And we thought that was a low number. And that was kind of predicted as to be the threshold for the population and whether it could sustain. So so they're in a really bad state. No other way to put it. And there is the possibility that this Western population will go through what's called a quasi-extinction. I mean, the species itself is not going extinct, but this population could, which is why we're in this kind of important situation, where the next year is really important, that we set them up for the most successes possible so that we can boost the population for next year and hopefully get them back. So the main reasons are some of them, and there's probably a variety of influences on monarch conservation, on monarch declines, but the main ones we've seen or that have been published, that have been studied, are the loss of milkweed. Like I said, without milkweed, monarchs don't survive. Same thing with, and we've seen loss of milkweed across the US due to development, due to agriculture using increased use of herbicides and things like that. We've also seen a loss of, along with milkweed habitat, a loss of nectar plants, those that provide food for the butterflies as they are migrating or, mating, laying eggs. That nectar sources are important, and those are declining for the same reasons milkweeds are. And particularly in California, because they overwinter in these specific groves along the coast of California, and real estate on the coast of California is incredibly valuable. And there's a lot of development there. We've definitely had, there's been a lot of deterioration of the groves there and in Mexico. So, we're focusing on monarchs for and milkweeds for this particular EcoQuest, but in general, you might be wondering why we're so focused on this one species. Well, that's because monarchs are likely an indicator species for other insect declines. They're really unique in that because they go to these overwintering sites, both populations, we can estimate their population numbers and track them from year to year. And we can't necessarily do that for other insects, other butterflies. And so the declines we're seeing in monarchs are very likely, we're also seeing in other insect and butterfly species. And there's been signs of this. It's just not as clear as with monarchs. Same thing with honeybees. We see a lot of news about declines of honeybees, and that's because a lot of honeybee colonies are managed or tracked. And so we have a better idea of when there's a decline.
All right. So my name's Natalie. I work with Kim at Desert Botanical Garden on our Monarch and pollinator program. And let's talk about what you can do. So we heard about the declines. We heard about some of the not so good news about monarch populations. So what can you do to help this, to help the species, and also to help, you know, other pollinators in our urban ecosystem? So participating in the EcoQuest is great. You know, like Kim said, it's great for us to know where these plants are and where we're seeing monarchs right now in Arizona, particularly because we're such an interesting state for monarchs. You know, we have monarchs that are part of the eastern population and part of the western population. And it's always good for us to learn a little bit more about where we can see monarchs here. Another thing you can do is to plant pollinator habitat. So when we talk about planting habitat for butterflies and pollinators, we generally talk about 3 types of plants. We want those nectar plants in there. Like Kim mentioned, we want to, these are the plants that adult butterflies are feeding on or other pollinators are feeding on. And it's good to plant a variety of colors, shapes, and to encompass plants that hit a variety of blooming times so that you're getting pollinators that are active at different times of the year, different times of the day, and you have certain pollinators that, you know, are more attracted to different shapes or particular colors. And then shelter plants. So we're generally thinking about shelter plants with adult butterflies. You might see them roosting in large trees at night. And we also want some kind of sturdier plants in there for them to make their chrysalis. When they get to that part of their life stage, we want to give them a sturdy place to crawl onto and make their chrysalis. And then host plants, right? So we talked about milkweed and monarchs. Milkweed is the host plant for monarchs. It's the only plant they can lay their eggs on, the only plant their caterpillars can eat. And then we have a variety of other host plants for other butterfly species. So you can have lots of different types of butterflies in your urban habitat. And then we want to remember to avoid pesticide use as much as possible to really encourage a healthy urban ecosystem. And we know that these small patches of habitat that occur throughout our urban areas really do make an impact. So wherever, you know, you can add a little bit of habitat, it is doing some good. So what is the garden doing? Most of you, or some of you probably know about our Monarch and Pollinator Conservation Initiative here at Desert Botanical Garden called Great Milkweed Grow Out. So this is our Monarch and Pollinator Conservation Program, and it has 3 main components: native plant propagation, outreach and education, and research. So we propagate not only native milkweeds, but also native nectar plants. And we have quite a variety of native milkweed species here in Arizona, and a lot of great native nectar plants, and a lot of them just aren't commercially available. You know, if you want to put these plants in your urban spaces, or even if you want to do a restoration or planting out in a wildlands area, it's really hard to find these plants. So a big part of our program is growing these plants, getting them out into our community, into our urban spaces, and also working on making them available for, like I mentioned, some of those wildlands restoration projects as well. And a big way that we get plants out into the community is through outreach and education. Part of our program in pre-COVID times, we did a lot of offsite outreach with schools. You know, hopefully we'll get back to that at some point. We work with schools and community centers to put in pollinator gardens. Right now, a little bit of that is on hold, but we're still donating a lot of plants to schools and organizations around the valley that are working still now, you know, to put in pollinator habitat. And we also do presentations like this one, or in-person presentations, again, maybe one day. And then we do a lot of research as part of this program. And we're generally asking, what are the best milkweeds for monarchs? So we look at things like egg laying preference, you know, which of our native milkweeds do female monarchs prefer to lay eggs on? How do the caterpillars survive on different milkweeds? How do they support other pollinators or other beneficial insects? How might these relationships change under different environmental conditions like drought or warming conditions? So all kind of centered around this general question, finding the best milkweeds for monarchs and for pollinators. And as I mentioned, we have quite a large diversity of milkweed species in Arizona. So we have about 30 native milkweed taxa, and you can see just by looking at this picture, there's a huge variety in leaf shape, in flower color, in size. Some of these plants are 8 feet tall. Some of them are just a few inches off the ground, and they're spread all over the state, and we don't know very much about them. So through our propagation, we work to grow some of these plants. Through our research, we work to figure out how these plants support monarchs differently. We know that milkweed is the host plant for monarchs and for queen butterflies, but we do know that some plants are better hosts than others. These milkweeds have defensive traits. They have toxins in their leaves. They may have hairs on their leaves. They have a sticky latex, and all plants kind of have different levels of all of these defensive traits, and all of those things go into, what makes a good host plant for a monarch and a queen. So there's a lot to learn about these plants and a lot of diversity to explore in the state. So I'm going to go through just a few common plants that you might find if you're looking to plant something in your backyard or somewhere in our urban area. So this one, desert milkweed, I'm sure most of you have seen this one. It's probably the easiest to find, the easiest of our native milkweeds to find. Get about 4 feet tall, and it can get pretty wide too if you let it. It's a great low desert plant. It can take really hot spots, really low water use, and then it blooms pretty regularly. So, really good nectar source as well. And we know that sort of anecdotally, this is definitely a great host plant for queens, also for monarchs. This is one of the ones that we are exploring in our research as well. So maybe a little more information at some point. Arizona milkweed. You probably are familiar with this one if you've spent time at the garden or are familiar with our project here. This is kind of one of our favorite ones for monarchs. It's a great host plant for monarchs and for queens. It's a small plant. It's naturally a wash plant, so it can do with a little bit of extra shade, a little bit of extra water in your yard, but still a great native desert plant, and stays really small, about 2 by 2 or 2 by 3. And just gets covered in these white flowers. So really a darling little plant. And then this one, you may have also seen that a few years ago, you couldn't find this one anywhere, but some of the growers, bigger growers in Arizona have started to produce this one now. And our research has shown that this isn't the best host plant for monarch butterflies. But it's still a great nectar plant. It's still a great native nectar source and a really pretty plant. You can see it's called pine needle milkweed. You can see the leaves on there, look like little pine leaves, pine needles. So we don't necessarily recommend this one as a host plant, but a super great plant still to have in your yard as a nectar plant. So if you want this milkweed in your yard, just get some other milkweeds, some of the other two that we talked about, and plant them as well, so that you'll have that really strong host plant part of your garden. And then I'm just going to go through a couple nectar plants. You may be familiar with this one, mist flower. There's it can be a couple different genuses here of this one. This can kind of be a sprawling, low growing plant. You have these really pretty puffball flowers, and you'll just see it covered in queen butterflies. There's a compound in the nectar that male queens will get from the nectar and convert into a pheromone that they use for the mating ritual. So you'll often see it just covered in queens. Monarchs love it too, just a really great nectar plant. And then we also recommend Verbena. So this has a really nice, good desert native plant. These clusters of flowers are really nice. And then I'm not going to go through any other specific nectar plants, but we certainly, if you have questions about certain plants, things to keep in mind are that monarchs and other insects aren't seeing flowers the same way that you're seeing them. So they're able to see in ultraviolet. They're seeing something different when than you're seeing when you're looking at a flower. And monarchs do have some innate preferences for flower colors like oranges and yellows. I know we just talked about 2 purple flowers, so that's a thing to note. They can learn pretty quickly which ones offer the most nectar. So think about things like like we said earlier, blooming time, you want to encompass plants that are blooming year round. So you're providing resources for monarchs and other pollinators year round. Butterflies particularly like clusters of flowers or these kind of landing pad flowers, things that are look like little daisies, you know, so they have a place to stand while they're feeding. That is all I have. So Kim and I are here to answer questions. Anything you might have?
So we have a few questions that came through by email. And Natalie, if you'll do me a favor, actually, we'll leave that slide up for just a second, but then we can stop sharing that screen so we can kind of see some faces. But one of the questions that came through is, are there local seed sources for less common milkweed species that are easy to get? I'd love to grow Erosa or Speciosa if they do well in Phoenix.
Yeah, so that's a great question. It can be really hard to find seed sources. A lot of our plants are grown from wild collected seed, and that's kind of one of the things that we work on is increasing seed availability and as well as plant availability. So I don't have a good source for native Erosa seed. You may be able to get Speciosa from a group up at NAU called Arizona Milkweeds for Monarchs, I think. I can look that up and share it in the chat maybe, but they grow some seed. They might have Speciosa, they might have Erosa. We sell small amounts of seed too, so potentially at our plant sales in the future, you know, we always have some milkweed seed packets out there, but we might have those. If you're going to grow Speciosa in the low desert, it is naturally a higher elevation plant, but we had some growing out here in full sun, just needed a little extra water, and it did fine. So, yeah.
I think that's a tough thing in general, is native seed sourcing. And Danielle Carlock is here from the Maricopa Native Seed Library, and she may have some coming up. But the next question that we have is, do you have any ideas for Monarch citizen science or research projects for college students, especially for remote engagement?
So, I mean, there's probably, just thinking about our research focus, you know, as far as determining the best milkweeds, one of the ways that can be done is documenting which plants the butterflies and butterflies are using, both as a host plant and as a nectar source. And this could be done year round with, you know, if you wanted to incorporate queens or really any butterfly, or even bees, if you wanted to get into that. And it's really, you know, if they can say pick, you know, if they can find a milkweed in their neighborhood, and particularly the desert milkweed is often used in developments and stuff, there might be some available. But if you can have two plant species to compare, or, you know, or I guess even one to collect data on, to get an idea of what's visiting that milkweed and how often, whether there's more monarchs, more queens, if you're talking about a milkweed, all of those things are really valuable as far as citizen science goes, for us to know those usages, and that comes into what's part of what EcoFlora is doing too.
Thank you, Kim. Danielle with Maricopa Native Seed Library says, at this time, the seed library only has subulata with some angustifolia on the way. So the next question we have is, in my yard in early January, 2 smallish monarchs emerged with deformed wings. A little bit of research suggested they were affected by the OE parasite. Is this a one-time problem with individuals, or does milkweed host the parasite? And if it does, how can I eradicate it?
This is a great question. I think so. What the person is talking about, OE is a protozoan parasite that can affect monarchs. We tend to, in Arizona, we have a very low OE rate, to the fact that I don't know that we've ever seen it or, you know, at least not obviously in our research. There's a relatively low incidence of it. But so I can't say for sure what you were seeing, but I can also say that deformed wings are very common. The process, and especially during the winter, especially in January, the process of going from one stage to the next in a butterfly is an area where a lot of the mortality occurs, because it has to happen so quickly. Those monarchs have to get out of the chrysalis before their wings start to harden, which is within, you know, minutes. So if it's too cold, if there's other things going on and they're not able to make it out, either fully or, you know, the wings start to harden at all before they're fully out of the chrysalis, they're going to have deformed wings. So it is really common. It is one of the sources, unfortunately, one of the sources of mortality in butterflies in general. So I can't say for sure what you had. I just wanted to assure you that, you know, I don't want you to feel like, you know, you had necessarily had diseased individuals. If you are concerned that it is OE, yes, the spores from OE will stay on the milkweed plant, or can stay on the milkweed plant, and then future caterpillars that feed on that plant ingest the parasite, and that's how it continues. So if you are concerned about it, generally the advice is to, I mean, these are perennial plants, they grow back, you cut the foliage off, and when it grows back, the parasite shouldn't be there. Just like, you know, when we're talking about, you know, tropical milkweed and the rest of the US, you know, they say chop it off, just because that's part of what keeps the OE going is milkweed that, you know, stays with foliage year round. But we have that in Arizona anyway. But yeah, you can take the foliage off.
Related to that, I've seen it recommended by Xerxes Society to not plant tropical milkweed, Asclepias curasavica. Yeah, okay. That was a new one for me, because it can transmit the OE parasite and also enables out of season breeding. Is that true for our area?
So this is a tricky question, and, you know, one that we've definitely gotten before. So I'll tell you, you know, our take on it, which is the concerns with tropical milkweed in other parts of the country are, like you said, that the foliage, you know, the plant is available year round for the butterflies. It doesn't die back in the winter. But that's exactly what our native milkweeds do, or some of them. You know, we will have plants that are, you know, have available leaves year round. So I don't think necessarily tropical milkweed is going to be something that, you know, encourages this out of cycle breeding when we've already got native milkweeds that do that. And like I said, the OE parasite is very low here in the Phoenix area, and really in Arizona, compared to most of the other populations, and that's been published, been documented. So we always encourage natives. Always. Natives are the best, and, you know, we try to keep them to the regions. I mean, you know, like we're promoting Arizona milkweed. It's technically not native to this, you know, Metro Phoenix area, but if you're planting it in a backyard, you know, unless if you're planting it in a backyard, it's still going to be really good for the monarchs. The benefit is still there. And so if you can find native milkweed, plant native milkweed. That's the bottom line. If curasavica, the tropical milkweed, is what's available, I mean, I'm not going to say, you know, it's evil, don't get, you know, but yes, most monarch conservation agencies will say don't plant it, but I also know that native milkweed can be hard to find here. and the monarchs will use it as a host plant. So.
Thank you. Sierra says, what's your take on monarch rearing kits? Are they at all effective in helping bolster populations? Are there any reputable sources for such an activity?
So I'll answer this one, then I'll let Natalie take some questions. So it is generally considered that any kind of home rearing, even, you know, if you're, it's generally not recommended to do home rearing at all, to try to bolster the population. You know, it comes with some extra risks, you know, that some of that is the parasites and they can pass between caterpillars if you've got them enclosed together. But for education purposes, yes, there are rearing kits, but we never recommend those because they are from out of state. And actually, I don't even know that you can get monarch rearing kits here because it is, the USDA does not allow them to be shipped across the continental divide. And I don't know of any California producers of those monarch rearing kits. You could probably get painted ladies, but again, they're going to be imported from, a lot of them, you know, come from the Southeast. And unless you want to euthanize them at the end, which I don't think people want to do, we don't want you releasing them. They're not from here. They can carry all kinds of, they have different genes, they can carry different diseases and things to our populations. So no, we don't recommend them. If you are, you know, an educator and you have milkweed plants and you have some caterpillars on those, you could maybe bring in a few, but I wouldn't do it to try to bolster the population. So yeah.
Natalie, did you have anything to add to that?
Mm-hmm.
So Danielle Carlock said, can you tell us how to propagate Accordio wrightii?
Yeah, Danielle, we can talk more offline too if you want more detail, but I've found that these are pretty easy to propagate. I just started last year, and I actually just put them, oh, sorry, I was trying to remember. Yeah, we start them in a peat and perlite mix. Basically, it's a really light soil mix, has a little bit of sand in it, and I can, like I said, we can chat offline if you want a little bit more information, but we start them in those 12-inch cones that you may have seen. So they're long, thin pots, and we put them in the greenhouse, just a few, you know, if you've seen the seeds, they're kind of fluffy, you just stick them in there. They come up really well. You might be able also to do them in larger pots outside. Sounds good.
Thanks, Natalie. Does anyone have any other questions? We'll leave the chat up for just a minute. I am going to share my screen and show you the poster that we're going to raffle off. This is a really nice poster from Desert Botanical Garden and Great Milkweed Grow Out. It was very popular on Facebook. It had over 1,000 views. I was shocked. But yeah, we're going to raffle off this poster. I have Desert Botanical Garden hat, and I'm going to pull a name out for everyone that was in attendance today. Your name is in here, and I'll do it on screen so you know I'm not cheating. All right, so winner is Sherry Rosenquist. So Sherry, if you will, I'll drop my email in the chat. And if you will email me, you can either send me your address or you can pick up at Desert Botanical Garden. So let me know your preference. And I don't see any other questions. So
Jenny, it looks like there's a question about angustifolia seeds, on growing angustifolia seeds.
I
from
think
Elena.
Yeah, Natalie and Elena, you worked that out. We're going to
Did
talk
you?
later.
Oh, that's a different Natalie.
I was just gonna say, Elena, feel free to, we can chat
Okay.
offline if you want. And it's similar. I've started them, like I just mentioned, with the Accordia in those smaller cones, but I've also started them outside in larger pots with a different soil mix. So we can chat. I know you have my contact info.
Thank you for catching that, Kim. Much appreciated. All right. So other than that, I don't think we missed anything. Oh, we have from Krista, any tips on starting milkweed from seed?
Yeah, Krista, it's going to depend a little bit on the species, but is there a particular species you're asking about, or just in general? For most of our, you'll see if you kind of look up that desert milkweed. Okay, yeah, desert milkweed, they're pretty, it's a low desert plant. They're pretty easy to get going, or they should be. You want to make sure you're starting with seeds that are clean and dry. So, collect them from your plants and just let them dry out a little bit in a paper bag or something before you plant them. And then I start them actually outside in larger pots, in 1 gallon pots, but you could also use, like little cups, drinking cups. You just want a well draining soil mix. So I use a mix that's 50%, just kind of a regular nursery pot mix, 50% pumice. So it's going to drain pretty well. And then, keep them outside in the sun. Just make sure they stay really wet until the seeds start coming up, and should do well.
Can you plant them in the ground, Natalie?
You could plant them directly in the ground. You just want to make sure that the area is going to stay wet, consistently wet until the seeds come up. So you might need, if you have a drip or something there, you might need to just make sure it gets a little extra water so the ground's wet until those seeds come up.
We have one more. I am from Ohio and had lots of milkweed. Is there a variety that will survive near northern Phoenix, 67th and Happy Valley-ish?
Yeah, any of the 3 species that we went over today in the presentation will do fine over there. So those are probably your best bets for finding things locally.
All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Thanks so much for joining us tonight and wanting to help conserve monarchs and milkweeds. If you'd like to contribute to monarch observations year-round, you can join Great Milkweed Grow Out's project on iNaturalist, and I will place that link in the chat right now. And if you'd like to learn more about the Metro Phoenix Ecoflora project, we will be celebrating our very first anniversary on February 23rd at 6 p.m. And I'll also drop that Zoom invite in the chat for you. And we'll stay tuned for a couple of minutes if anyone has additional questions. But other than that, thank you again and have a wonderful evening.